I sent a cruel message to my wife's lover while they were together, "You can have her." They were shocked, but I knew I was in control. It was the end of something I never imagined would end like this. Betrayal, it destroys, but it also liberates. What they didn't know was that I was already winning, even before they knew they had lost. It was ironic, to think that, for years, I had been the last to know. My marriage seemed perfect on the outside, with our smiles at family dinners and birthdays celebrated with warm hugs. No one would have imagined what was going on behind the facade that I worked so hard to maintain. But something started to change. Small signs, almost imperceptible at first. The ringing on the cell phone that she hurriedly hid. The commitments that appeared out of nowhere. The excuses, always calculated, always so well rehearsed. The silence screamed on the nights she spent with her friends. And I was drowning in doubt, caught between the desire to confront her and the fear of the truth. Because deep down, I already knew. I didn't need proof, just the gnawing feeling that something was deeply wrong. But I waited. I waited until I was sure. Because if it was going to end, I was going to end it on my terms. The first time I saw the two of them together, my heart stopped. There they were, laughing, so at ease, as if the world around them were theirs. The world that, until recently, I thought was also mine. She didn't notice that I was there, watching from the corner, as they exchanged glances and whispers that were once mine. The pain was intense, but not enough to break me. At that moment, I knew the battle had begun, but I would not lose. I returned home in silence, and that night, next to her in bed, I felt the weight of an ocean of lies between us. But I also knew it was about to turn the tide. Her betrayal was the key to everything I needed. She was so immersed in her own illusion that she didn't realize how close she was to the precipice. The days that followed were a calculated dance. She didn't know that I had discovered everything. I continued pretending, observing. Every word, every lie that came out of her mouth gave me more strength for what was to come. And then, I knew it was time to act. I sent the message. While they were together, I sent the message that would change everything: "You can have her." I imagined the shock in their eyes, the confusion, the panic. It was as if I had exploded a bomb in the middle of the game that they thought they controlled. They could have the stolen moments, the empty promises, but I would have everything that really mattered. And that included control of what came next. The message was the first step. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. They were trapped in their own trap. What about me? I was free. Free to expose the truth, to rewrite the end of this story. They had no idea what was coming. The divorce, as I planned, was just a formality. She didn't know how financially compromised she was until it was too late. That debt she hid, accumulated in my name, would be the last piece of the puzzle. A debt I had discovered while investigating what else she was hiding. She thought she had everything under control, but I was already dictating the rules. Now, I imagine the despair in her eyes when she realized that, in addition to losing her lover, she was deep in debt that she could never pay. She, who had so despised the safe comfort I offered, was now alone, exposed. And the lover? He disappeared as quickly as he appeared. When the tables turned, they didn't know what else to do. What started as a betrayal ended as a brutal lesson. But the story doesn't end here. The message I sent was just the beginning. What she doesn't know yet is that there is much more to come. Welcome to our channel. Here, the stories you will hear are fictional, but the lesson is clear: betrayal destroys lives, families, and hearts. We neither support nor encourage any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show the devastating consequences of these choices. Now, get ready. What you are about to hear is an intense story, full of twists and turns, where actions have consequences. Take a deep breath and let yourself be carried away by this shocking narrative. Good story. It was a cold autumn morning. The wind cut through the tree-lined streets, while the still shy sun cast long shadows on the stone sidewalks. In the center of a quiet neighborhood, Nathan and Emma's two-story home reflected the perfect appearance of a successful life. The grass was impeccably trimmed, the flowers in the garden were carefully arranged, and the large windows gave a glimpse of the apparent calm inside. Nathan has always been the kind of meticulous man, almost methodical in his routines. Early in the morning, he was already in the kitchen, preparing coffee. He watched the smoke rise from the mug as he gazed absently out the window. His thoughts, however, were far away. There was a restlessness in his chest, something he couldn't identify but that seemed to grow every day. Emma walked lightly down the stairs, surrounded by the familiar scent of fresh coffee. His smile was warm, but it carried a hint of tiredness, something almost imperceptible, but something Nathan had noticed for weeks. She was the type of woman who attracted looks wherever she went. Intelligent, charismatic and always so present. They had the kind of relationship that their friends envied, the kind that seemed invulnerable to the trappings of time. And for many years, that's how Nathan felt, safe, complete. The two met in college, in one of those situations that seemed destined to happen. Emma, with her free spirit, brought light into the life of Nathan, who had always been more reserved. He loved her for the way she laughed without holding back, for the way she saw beauty in small things, and especially for the way she made everything around her seem lighter. Together, they built a life that, for all intents and purposes, was a reflection of success, a comfortable home, well-established careers, and friends who admired them. But the foundations of that solid life began to show small cracks that, although not visible to everyone, became increasingly difficult for Nathan to ignore. In the last few months, Emma seemed distracted, as if a part of her was always missing, even when she was by her side. Conversations about her work became more vague, and last-minute appointments became a constant. "Are you going to work late again today?" asked Nathan, as he placed the coffee on the table. Emma smiled, but her eyes looked away for a brief moment. "Yes, the office is in chaos. We have tight deadlines, and it seems like things never get resolved there," he replied, pulling out a chair to sit at the table. "But I promise that tomorrow I will be calmer." Nathan nodded, but inside him, something was stirring. He knew that Emma was always dedicated to her work, and it wasn't strange that she sometimes needed to stay late. But her tone, the way her voice faltered for a second, left a bitter taste in his mouth. He quickly shook the thought away. They had been together for so long, they knew each other so deeply, that doubting it seemed almost absurd. The house routine continued as usual. Nathan spent his days at the architecture firm he founded with a college friend, and Emma worked as a marketing manager at a large company in the city. Their careers have always been very demanding, but this had never been a problem for them. There was an unspoken understanding that they both needed space to grow, and the work-life balance, while challenging, worked. On the weekends, however, Nathan noticed something was changing. The moments of relaxation, which were once filled with conversation, laughter and intimacy, now seemed tinged with a subtle distance. Emma was present, but her thoughts often seemed to be far away, elsewhere. He tried to start a conversation, but somehow the conversations became superficial, almost as if they were avoiding something. "I was thinking about booking our annual trip for the end of the year," Nathan said one Sunday afternoon, as they walked through the park. Emma looked at him with a smile, but seemed a little distracted. "Oh, of course, we can see that," he replied, without much enthusiasm. Nathan noticed the tone of voice and tried not to let it bother him. After all, it could just be the pressures of work or the wear and tear of years of routine. He was always someone more down to earth, pragmatic, while Emma was driven by passion and intensity. But lately, that flame he loved so much about her seemed to be directed elsewhere. As the days went by, that feeling of disconnection intensified. Nathan didn't know if it was real or a result of his own insecurity. He began to take a closer look at the little details, the messages she received at night that she never responded to in front of him, the dates with friends that began to become more frequent, and the quick calls she answered with hurry, always changing the subject next to you. He tried to push the thoughts away by keeping busy with work and his hobbies. However, at night, when he lay next to Emma, the weight of doubt hung in the air. They still slept in each other's arms, but the warmth he used to feel had turned into something colder, more distant. Emma was still affectionate, but there was a formality to her gestures, as if she were physically there but her mind was elsewhere. And then came the night Nathan decided to act. It was an ordinary Wednesday, and Emma was, once again, going out to meet a friend for dinner. He knew he could no longer ignore what he felt. As soon as she left, Nathan, for the first time in his marriage, stopped trusting her blindly. He decided to take the car and follow her. There was no anger in his eyes, just an almost desperate need to know. He didn't know what he expected to find, but he knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. Emma drove through the city streets until she stopped at a restaurant in the center. Nathan parked a safe distance away and waited. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his hands were sweating, but he remained still, watching from inside the car. Minutes later, she went downstairs and entered the restaurant. I wasn't alone. In that instant, silent confirmation hit him like a cold wave. He saw no kisses, no touches that could deliver what he feared, but it was enough. Something inside Nathan broke. The woman he loved, who he believed he knew better than himself, was sharing an intimate space with another man, laughing, talking, living a part of her life that he was completely unaware of. The way back home was silent. Nathan's mind was buzzing with thoughts, and what was once a vague doubt now turned into a deep emptiness. He knew that whatever was happening here, it wasn't something simple. But he also knew that, no matter how painful it was, he couldn't act on impulse. That night, as he waited for Emma to return, he began plotting his next steps. What came next would not just be a conversation about what he had seen, but a twist that would change everything. The feeling of control was slowly returning, and with it, the certainty that he could still turn the game around. Emma arrived home late, as usual. He smiled when he entered, as if nothing had happened, as if the night was just another in his routine. Nathan watched her from afar, without saying anything. He wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not yet. There was something bigger at stake, something she hadn't even imagined. And there, in that silence between them, the pieces began to fall into place. How was dinner? He asked, his voice low but calm. It was great, she replied, smiling, without noticing the storm that was forming around her. Nathan smiled back, but his heart was set. In the days that followed, Nathan watched Emma's movements with unsettling precision. He didn't mention what he had seen at the restaurant, nor did he change his routine in any noticeable way. However, Emma's every gesture, every laugh out of context, every excuse for being late sounded like a confirmation of what he already knew. The betrayal was there, between them, hanging like a heavy cloud, but Nathan still hadn't decided how or when to confront it. During the nights, while Emma slept next to him, Nathan remained awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. The warmth he once felt at his side had turned into a constant cold, a distance that only he seemed to perceive. But now, the silence didn't consume him. It fed him, prepared him for the inevitable confrontation. Emma, without knowing it, went on with her life, believing that her lies were safe, hidden under the routine of home, work, marriage. But Nathan was just waiting for the right moment. On an ordinary afternoon, he decided to search her cell phone. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I was ready to find something. Emma had become careful, always carrying the device with her and rarely leaving it without a password. But that afternoon, she left it on the kitchen table for a few minutes while she took a shower. It was a window of opportunity that Nathan couldn't pass up. With steady hands, he unlocked the phone. At first, he didn't see anything suspicious, trivial messages, conversations with friends, even some exchanges with her mother. But then, he realized something. A name I didn't recognize appeared repeatedly among recent conversations. When he opened the chat, the messages were short, careful, without any major explicit revelations, but they carried a familiarity that made him shudder. They arranged meetings, exchanged intimate jokes, small details that suggested a dangerous proximity. Every word he read made Nathan's heart beat faster. Emma's face, until then immaculate in his mind, began to disintegrate as the messages made clear what he was trying to deny to himself. There was no longer any room for doubt. Betrayal wasn't just a possibility. It was real, palpable, and it was there, in front of him, in the form of cold, calculated messages. When Emma got out of the shower, Nathan had already returned to his usual place in the living room, reading the newspaper as he did every afternoon. He pretended not to notice when she took her cell phone back, but his mind was already buzzing with the new discoveries. She didn't know that he knew. And that gave him an advantage he wasn't yet ready to use. Over the next few days, Nathan continued to observe. He didn't just want to confront Emma. He wanted to be sure, he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He knew she could deny it, turn the tables on him, use sweet words to confuse reality. And he needed something stronger than words. It was on a Friday night that he decided to act. Emma had said she was going out with a friend for a quick dinner, something unpretentious. Nathan just nodded as she prepared herself, without question, without showing any uneasiness. However, as soon as she left, he followed her once again. The route was familiar. It wasn't the first time he'd followed her, but that night, something felt different. She parked the car in front of a small bar, more discreet than the restaurant last time. Nathan parked a safe distance away and waited. It wasn't long before he saw the man approaching. It was the same one he had seen before, the man with whom she shared those complicit messages. They walked into the bar together, laughing, looking at ease, as if nothing in the world could disturb them. Nathan felt his stomach drop. He got out of the car, his body moving as if on autopilot. There was no anger in that moment, just the need to face the truth face to face. He entered the bar, keeping to the shadows, watching them from afar. Emma looked happy, lighter than he had seen her in weeks, maybe even months. She smiled in a way he hadn't seen since their first years of marriage. The two were so involved with each other that they didn't notice Nathan approaching. He stopped just a few feet from their table, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Emma laughed at something the man said and held his hand on the table, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was at that exact moment that Nathan knew that the betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional, an irreparable break in the bond they had built. He could have confronted them there, in the middle of that bar, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the need to not lose control, or maybe it was the desire to make her feel the weight of her actions at another time, in another arena. He turned and left the bar in silence, his mind racing with thoughts but with a strange sense of clarity. The confirmation of the betrayal was there, raw and painful. What he would do next was only a matter of time. Upon returning home, Nathan sat in the living room, feeling the weight of betrayal on his shoulders. He knew this was the moment. He knew that from that night onwards, his life would change forever. What Emma didn't know was that he was already prepared. She had made her choice, and now he would be the one to dictate the rules. When she got home hours later, the smile on her face was the first thing to disappear upon seeing Nathan's serious expression. Without waiting for an explanation, he stood up, walked to the cell phone on the table and threw it towards her. "You think I don't know?" His voice was low, but carried with an intensity that made Emma freeze. The shock on her face was immediate. She looked at the phone and then at him, not knowing what to say. Nathan stared at her, without blinking, waiting for her to at least try to formulate some excuse. But the words didn't come. There was no longer any way to escape the truth. Emma knew she had been discovered. The silence in the room was overwhelming. Emma was frozen, her eyes fixed on the cell phone thrown in front of her as if it were a gun about to fire. Nathan remained standing, motionless, with his breathing controlled, but his eyes fixed on her as if watching a wall fall. He knew that moment was the breaking point, the line that would separate everything they had built from the inevitable abyss that loomed. Every second stretched out like an eternity, until she finally spoke. "Nathan." The words barely came out, suffocated by his own guilt. She didn't know how to continue. There was no excuse, no lie that could deflect the weight of the truth that now hung over them. Nathan didn't respond. His silence was even more terrifying than any angry outburst. He watched her as someone who finally sees something that had been in front of him the whole time, but only now, in the midst of the devastation, was it gaining clear contours. The mask of perfection had fallen, and what was left was something he could no longer recognize. "Why?" He finally broke the silence, his voice filled with deep pain. "I just want to understand, why?" Emma looked at him, her eyes teary. He tried to put the words together, but how can he explain the inexplicable? How can we justify destroying years of trust and love? She opened her mouth, closed it again. Nothing seemed enough. I don't know," he replied, almost in a whisper, looking down at the floor. The answer left her even more exposed. There was no clear motive, there was no plausible justification for what she had done. It wasn't about something that was missing from the marriage, nor about what Nathan failed to give her. It was just a selfish choice, and that was the truth she tried to avoid facing. Nathan shook his head, frustrated. He didn't want an easy excuse, nor did he expect her to know exactly what to say. But the lack of a concrete explanation left him adrift in a sea of pain. He had to find out on his own. "I needed to confront her once and for all. I read the messages," he said, his voice firm. "I know you were lying, that you left to be with him. And I know this didn't start yesterday." The revelation hit Emma like a punch in the stomach. She stood still, unable to find the right words. The weight of betrayal fell on her, leaving her with no way out. Nathan, in turn, approached her, his eyes fixed on hers, demanding a reaction. "How many times?" he asked, his voice sharp. "How many times have you lied to me, pretended everything was fine while you were with him?" She hesitated, her lips trembling, her voice weak. I don't know. I never wanted to hurt you, Nathan. I never wanted it to get to this point. But it arrived," he replied, without mercy. "And now there is no going back." She felt the weight of those words, each syllable echoing in the room, making the reality of the situation inescapable. Emma tried to defend herself, to say that she still loved Nathan, that it was a mistake, a deviation. But how could someone love and destroy at the same time? The betrayal had been calculated, repeated, like an escape. And now, there was no longer any escape possible. Nathan turned away from her, walking to the window, taking a deep breath to try to control the whirlwind of emotions that dominated him. The anger, the pain, the sense of loss, everything mixed together in his mind like a suffocating chaos. "I've always been here for you," he began, his voice hoarse but still firm. "I have always supported you, loved you, been by your side. How could you throw it all away like it meant nothing?" Emma felt tears run down her face. She knew she had thrown away much more than a marriage. He had destroyed the trust of someone who never gave him reason to distrust, someone who was always honest and present. "I made a mistake, Nathan. There's no excuse for what I did. But," she paused, trying to control the sob that was rising in her throat. "But I still love you." Nathan turned to her in disbelief. What else could she say at that moment? That love somehow justified his mistakes. That words could fix what was so deeply broken. "Don't say that," he said, with a mixture of pain and anger in his voice. "Not after all. You don't know what it means to love someone. If I had known, I wouldn't have done it." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but Nathan raised his hand, cutting her off. "Love is not an excuse to destroy someone's life," he continued, his voice increasingly charged with emotion. "What you did was selfishness, not love. You made your choices and now you have to deal with their consequences. Emma burst into tears, but Nathan stood firm, knowing he couldn't give in to her pain. The betrayal was there, naked and raw, between them, like an open wound that would never heal. But there was something more, something she didn't yet know. Something that would change everything again. Nathan sat back down on the couch, head down, thoughts spinning. He knew this was the moment to turn the tables, to reveal that not only did he know about the betrayal, but that he had also discovered the secret she was hiding, the secret she probably believed was buried. He looked at Emma once more, tears still streaking her face, but now there was an unsettling calm in her eyes. "What did you do, Emma?" he asked, his voice softer but still sharp. She looked at him confused, not understanding what he meant. "What were you really hiding?" he insisted, this time with more intensity. Emma frowned, unable to understand what Nathan was implying. For a moment, his mind went blank, trying to find the logic behind the question. It wasn't just about the betrayal, there was something more he knew. Nathan got up again, this time going to the table where her cell phone was. He took an envelope from his jacket pocket and threw it on the table. "That's what you were hiding from me," he said, with frightening calm. Emma looked at the envelope, not understanding what it could be. With shaking hands, she opened it and pulled out the papers inside. As his eyes ran over the words, the color in his face began to fade. There was evidence of a massive debt, a debt she had accumulated over the past few years, all in Nathan's name. Loans, excessive spending, bills that were never paid, everything she tried to hide, masked by everyday lies. "Did you think I would never find out?" Nathan continued, while she absorbed the shock. "You put my name on every penny of that debt, while pretending that everything was fine, that our life was perfect. And now, you want me to believe that this was just a mistake." Emma could barely speak. She had tried to control the situation, to hide the consequences of her irresponsible choices from Nathan, hoping that, somehow, it would never come to light. But now, the weight of her actions crushed her, and the betrayal seemed small compared to what was really at stake. I was going to tell you, she stuttered, desperate, but unable to formulate a coherent explanation. Nathan interrupted her, his voice sharp. "When were you going to tell me?" "When everything was ruined. When the debt was so much that there was no way out. You didn't just betray me, Emma, you destroyed our entire lives with your lies." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Emma knew she had lost everything. It wasn't just the marriage, it was the trust, the respect, the future they had planned together. The betrayal was the last straw, but the secret was the final blow. Nathan stood up, walking towards the door without looking back. "There's nothing more to say," he declared, with a coldness that made her shiver. "You made your choice. Now, you have to live with it." And so, without looking back, Nathan left, leaving Emma alone, immersed in her own choices. Nathan walked down the street, the cold night wind hitting his face, but he barely felt his surroundings. Each step echoed in his mind like a hammer, trying to organize the chaos that had settled inside him. The revelation of the betrayal was enough to leave him adrift, but the weight of the debt that Emma had placed on his name sank him even deeper into a sense of loss and betrayal that he never imagined possible. As his thoughts swirled, he wondered how he had allowed his life to get to this point. For years, he believed he had a solid marriage based on mutual trust. Now it all seemed like an illusion, something built on lies that were slowly eating away at the fabric of his life. The impact of the betrayal was devastating in itself, but the secret of the debt destroyed him on a deeper level. It was not just the betrayal of the body or the heart, but the betrayal of the future itself. She had compromised everything. The streets were silent as he walked, lost in thought. He wasn't sure where to go or what to do. The house he shared with Emma no longer felt like his own. Everything inside was imbued with the memory of what they were, or at least what he believed them to be. Now, what was once her home seemed like a theater of lies and deceit. He needed space to breathe, to try to understand what was left of himself after everything. On the other side, Emma remained motionless in the room. The envelope with the documents was still in her hand, as if that piece of paper was the last anchor that tied her to reality. She knew things were over, that Nathan had seen and felt the weight of his actions. The tears had already dried, and emptiness took over her. What bothered her, besides the crushing guilt, was the uncertainty. She knew she had destroyed everything, but she still didn't know if she could bear the consequences of it. Emma was caught between two opposing forces, regret and resignation. A part of her desperately wanted to fix what she had broken, to beg for a second chance, however unlikely it might be. But another part, deeper and darker, whispered that perhaps it was too late. That the damage was irreparable and that, no matter how hard they tried, nothing would be able to restore what they once had. Sitting there, alone, the living room that had once been a haven of comfort and security now seemed to suffocate her. The memories of so many years together, of so many shared moments, were now like ghosts hovering over her, haunting her with the reality of what she had lost. Emma wondered, through silent tears, when exactly things started to fall apart. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, the moment when she stopped being the woman who gave herself body and soul to her husband and became someone capable of betraying him and destroying everything. The minutes passed, and Nathan's absence became a growing weight. She wondered where he was, what he was thinking, if there was still any hope left for them. But the truth she refused to accept was that he might never come back, and the house they shared was now just an empty space, a reminder of what they once were. Nathan, on the other hand, wasn't running away from the situation, but processing it. He knew that going home that night would make no sense. He needed time to reorganize his mind, to understand what he would do next. His anger had subsided, turning into something deeper, a thick sadness that weighed heavily on his shoulders. The betrayal was a fact, the secret of the debt too, but what to do with this information? How can he move on with his life, knowing that everything he built was destroyed in one fell swoop? He remembered an old conversation with his father, years ago, when he was still young. His father, with a serenity that Nathan could never forget, had told him, "Life will always betray us in some way, son. What defines who we are is how we deal with it." These words, which at the time seemed distant, now made sense. But he didn't know if he had the strength to deal with all that. The moral dilemma that now haunted him was simple but devastating: forgive or move forward without looking back. And if you forgave, would it be possible to rebuild what was destroyed? Could he trust her again? And if you decided to leave, what would happen to all the time, all the effort you both invested in the life you built? More importantly, would he be able to leave behind the part of himself that still loved Emma despite everything? Hours passed as Nathan wandered the streets, avoiding the need to make an immediate decision. He knew that eventually he would have to face everything head-on, but at that moment, the silence of the night was his only refuge. Back at the house, Emma looked around at the empty space that now felt suffocating. The walls that once witnessed moments of joy, discussions and reconciliations were now silent accomplices to his loneliness. She needed to make a decision too. Was there a path to repentance? Could she fight for Nathan, for their life together, or had she already accepted that the end was inevitable? As these questions hung in the air, a sense of despair began to set in. What was at stake was not just their marriage, but the essence of who she was. If Nathan didn't come back, if he decided there was no longer a place for her in his life, what would be left of Emma? The betrayal not only destroyed their marriage, but also her image of herself. Time was against them, and with each passing minute, the distance between Nathan and Emma widened. Both knew that the next match would be decisive, and that, one way or another, there would be no turning back. The house, now enveloped in an almost terrifying stillness, awaited the approaching inevitable outcome. Emma knew the only thing she could do was wait. Waiting to see if Nathan would return and, more importantly, if he would choose her again, despite everything that had happened. The night progressed, and both, in their separate solitude, faced the ghosts of the past, the decisions that were yet to come and the scars that, in some way, they would need to carry for the rest of their lives. The night seemed to have no end for Emma. The silence of the house enveloped her, bringing out all the emotions she tried to contain. She was on the verge of something she couldn't describe. The fear, regret, and panic of losing Nathan gnawed at her, but there was also a bitter acceptance that was beginning to set in. I knew the damage was great, perhaps irreparable. The debt, the betrayal, the lies accumulated over the months, everything now fell on his shoulders all at once. Sitting on the couch, still holding the envelope with the documents that had revealed the extent of her actions, she knew that the choices she made had led her to this point. There were no more excuses. Meanwhile, Nathan remained standing in front of the house for long minutes, the car still running, his gaze fixed on the door. He had returned, but he didn't know why. Maybe it was the need to face Emma one last time, to end this in a definitive way. Or perhaps, a small and almost inaudible part of him still wanted to find some semblance of salvation. He knew what he was about to do would change their lives forever. Upon entering the house, Nathan found Emma in the same position he had left her. She looked up at him but said nothing. There were no more words that could soften what was already broken. He closed the door behind him and walked silently into the living room, sitting in the armchair facing her. For a moment, all that could be heard was the sound of both of them breathing heavily, as if each was fighting their own internal battles, not knowing how to proceed. I needed to go back, Nathan finally broke the silence, his voice low but firm. Not to try to fix things. I needed closure. Something that allows us to move forward, somehow. Emma remained silent, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. She knew there was no more room to ask for forgiveness. Not after all. The betrayal, the debt, the suffering she had caused Nathan. None of this could be erased, and she knew that deep down, he understood that too. "What did you do?" Nathan began, taking a deep breath to control the anger that was still pulsing in his chest. "It wasn't just about the money or about him. You destroyed the trust we had. You threw away everything we built." His eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "I will never be able to forget this, Emma." She shook her head, knowing he was right. The physical betrayal was devastating, but the secret of the debt, the weight it had imposed on him without his knowing, was the final blow. Emma knew there was no going back. "I can't go on like this," Nathan continued, the tone of his voice becoming harder. "I thought, as I walked outside, that maybe there was a way to save this. To save both of us. But now I realize that I can't do it." Emma sobbed, covering her face with her hands. She wanted to beg for another chance, but she knew it would be futile. Everything he had done, the lies, the impulsive and selfish decisions, had led to this point. And now, she would pay the price. She tried to compose herself, but her words came out choppy. I never wanted it to be like this, Nathan. I got lost. I've done terrible things, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But please don't leave me." Her voice broke into an uncontrollable cry. Nathan was silent for a few seconds, watching the woman he once loved above all else. The woman he would have done anything for, but who now seemed like a stranger. His mind kept going back to what his father had said about betrayal, about how we deal with the consequences. And there, at that moment, he knew what he needed to do. "You made your choices, Emma," he said, with frightening calm. "And I did mine. I'm leaving." The words came out as a sentence. Emma tried to get up, but her legs gave out. She knew this was final. There was nothing more to say, nothing to do. Nathan stood up slowly, as if carrying an unbearable weight on his shoulders, but with the determination of someone who has finally decided his own destiny. "I'm going to see a lawyer tomorrow," he continued, his voice firm. "Let's resolve the issue of the house and the debt. This isn't going to be easy. But I need to move on, and so do you." Emma collapsed onto the couch, the pain of loss finally catching up to her. Everything she had tried to control, all the lies and manipulations, had slipped through her hands like sand. And now, all that was left was emptiness. Nathan looked at her one last time, his heart still heavy, but aware that there was no more room for regret. It didn't matter what he felt about her. The love, the anger, the resentment, it all came together in a whirlwind of emotions, but none of it would change the fact that that chapter of their lives was over. He turned and walked out the door, without looking back. The sound of the door closing was like the end of a long and painful story. Emma was left alone, the sound of heavy breathing filling the silence of the house. She knew she would never be the same again. That, from that moment on, she would have to deal with the consequences of her actions alone. The life she knew, that she once considered safe, had fallen apart. And what she would do from there was still a mystery that terrified her. Nathan, outside, took a deep breath of the freezing night air. The weight I carried was still there, but there was a new clarity. He knew the future would be difficult, full of challenges, but he also knew that, for the first time in months, he had control over what came next. Just as Emma would have to face her own demons, he would have to rebuild his life from scratch. And although there was still pain, there was also a kind of relief. The decision had been made. And with that, the path to the future was finally open. And so ends another impactful story. What did you think of this outcome? Comment your opinion below, we want to know. And if you're not yet a subscriber, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and not miss the next stories full of emotions and twists. Always remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show how these actions can destroy lives and how the choices we make have consequences. Until next time.